Margaret Ceann Corla, can you just clarify for me which amendments we're dealing with now?
We're dealing with 8 to 12.
8 to 12, fine, thanks very much. I suppose the first thing to say is that the bill is welcome, and the fact that we're passing it before the end of the year, or attempting to do so, is very positive. It's about 3 years ago now since our society was really shocked by the events that led to the death of Dara Quigley, and I think that has to be deeply regretted, and we should never see a repeat of it again. And then more recently, of course, the scandalous events around the Discord server and what emerged from that. And so we have this bill being pushed through now, and we want to welcome it very much. There's a couple of things in the amendments that we're dealing with that I'd like to speak to, and of course I'm going to push any amendments we have in there, particularly on records being, or images being held or stored. I think that's important that goes into the bill somewhere along the line, because relationships can come and go, but somebody who holds on to images that are of private or personal nature with an intent to do something with it is not acceptable. I do want to say, though, in the wider scheme of when you look at what's going on in Irish society, and in other societies indeed, it's not particular to this country, that there's a very worrying, deep, misogynistic and sort of abusive culture that exists among our society. A recent study from Trinity and Maynooth colleges showed how prevalent it is, and this is a very recent study, that about 15% of Irish adults have been raped at some point in their life. 1 in 3 have experienced some sort of sexual violence. 1 in 5 women have been raped, compared to 1 in 10 men. And 31% of Irish adults experience sexual harassment, unwanted sexual comment or behaviour. So it's a very deeply embedded part of our society. And although we welcome the legislation, I think for us to frame the problem just solely as one of the need to criminalise it and then it'll go away would be a big mistake. And we've seen in other societies, particularly if we look across to the USA, the amount of legislation around these issues has not made the society there any less misogynistic, dangerous or abusive. So if we don't present the problem as simply one of the need to criminalise, then we have to look at other social solutions to it. And tackling these wider societal issues, I think, is more of a challenge to us in the long run, because you don't just pass legislation to do it. There needs to be an emphasis on education, and as has been said, the need for a non-ethos-based sexual education programme that can deal with all of the issues around sexuality and, in particular, consent is absolutely apparent. And those of us who worked on the committee around the 8th Amendment, dealing with the recommendations from the Citizens' Assembly, will remember well that the recommendation we made was that sexual health and relationship education, including on areas of contraception and consent, in schools, colleges, youth clubs, other organisations involved in education with all young people, should be provided in an impartial and factual manner that is independent of school ethos. That was the actual recommendation. Now, I asked a question about the plans to implement that recommendation very recently, and clearly from the answer I'm not terribly comforted, because it does say that they are having a review of the RSE, which is the model of the education that we have been using, and it repeats that schools have a responsibility to provide this, having regard to the ethos of the school. So I'm not hugely encouraged by that answer, but I do think that we have to look outside just the criminalisation of these issues to why it's happening in the first place. And for that reason, I think society as a whole needs to give recognition to how sexual abuse can impact on us. And that will need more investment. It will need more investment not just in education, but in organisations that would support people who suffer from this kind of abuse. In 2018, the organisation 1 in 4 had to close its doors to waiting lists for adult survivors of abuse because they just didn't have the capacity to deal with the demand that was on them. And the more we begin to, if you like, uproot this from all aspects of our society, the more we are going to have a demand for this. So I think it's imperative that any state, any government and all the departments connected with it, health, justice and education, release those resources and begin to deal with it in a wider societal way, as well as passing pieces of legislation, because no matter what we do here today, it's not going to end tomorrow. There's a deep-rooted problem there, and we begin with our young people and indeed with re-educating and working with adults who have a problem with misogyny as well. If we're dealing with Amendment number 12 in the names of Tommy Pringle, Joan Collins and Catherine Connolly, I would just pass this remark on it, that anybody convicted under this should be on the sexual offenders list. I would have a problem with that. If you're a 17-year-old and you could be convicted under this for abusing images, for the rest of your life you carry that with you, regardless of how much changes you can make, how you can move forward, how regretful you are of it, and it has huge consequences in terms of where you can live, where you can work. So I would have a problem with that amendment. I also think the use of the word reckless in amendment number 11 is open to being too broadly interpreted. And again, here I would include minors. Are minors people under the age acting recklessly, or is it part of a culture that needs to be uprooted? So I wouldn't agree with all the amendments, but I do welcome the bill. Thank you.